Hey everyone, my name is Sean Cecil from the Oculus Institute, and today I'm going to talk about what Sigmund Freud missed out on. One thing that is very important to building a career that inspires you is to get clarity on your values. And to get clarity on your values means that you have to do a lot of self-awareness work. This is what most people skip. This is why I am so good at getting that particular outcome with clients, because I don't skip it. I do it very thoroughly with them. And in the course of doing the self-awareness work, one thing that has come up a lot that many clients have asked me is, how does this mirror with Freudian psychology, right? With the ego and the id and the superego and all this other stuff. So for those of you who haven't studied Freudian psychology, I'll just give you kind of like the quick background. The id is the animalistic part, is just the drives and the, hunger, sex, do what I want, etc. thing. The superego is the conditioning from the environment, from people around you, etc. of, oh, you shouldn't do that. That's the kind of the shoulds and the should nots and the authorities and the orthodoxies and all that other crap. And then the ego is supposedly this this part of the mind that balances between the two, and also that interacts kind of socially, and it's kind of like socially aware of what's going on, and et cetera, right? Whereas the superego is primarily operating off of past conditioning, and the id just doesn't care about anything except what it wants, right? So that's kind of the triad of Freudian psychology. And I've worked with people, and there are two problems that come out of working with that model. Two things that Sigmund Freud really missed. And when you expand it and you kind of get a bigger sense and you add what I would call the esoteric lens, that resolves a lot of these issues. So the first problem is that the id, the ego, and the superego are not actually unified entities, especially the id and the superego, right? So you can have competing orthodoxies that say two separate things, right? So you can say, well, my mother always told me to do this, but my father always told me to do this, and those two are not necessarily aligned, right? Or your boss is telling you to do X, but your religion tells you that you shouldn't do X, right? Maybe your boss is telling you that you should go lie to customers, and your religion says you shouldn't, right? Now, you're in a situation where the superego is actually conflicted with itself, because it's not a single entity. It's really many different splinters of consciousness that exist within that header, right? It's the same thing with the id, right? The id may say, hey, listen, I want more money, but then the id also wants to go out and go drinking on Sunday night, right? And so you have different splinters of consciousness there, and they'll be in conflict with each other. The second and probably larger problem is that if you operate with this Freudian model and you basically take the role of the ego and try to manage the id and the superego, that's really challenging, because the id can absolutely overpower the ego, and the superego is very cunning and analytical and can absolutely outsmart the ego, guaranteed, right? And so if you're sitting there in that position, then you're going to find yourself constantly getting tricked by the superego and overpowered by the id. You're going to be really frazzled, and it's just going to be a pain. And this is where we add in the esoteric lens, or the spiritual lens. And that is that the id, the ego, and the superego all exist at the layer of what's called the mind, right? These are the thoughts in your head. But the esoteric lens, or the spiritual lens, is that you are not your thoughts. You are actually the observer, or the awareness, or the soul that monitors and programs those thoughts. And in this case, right, one way you might want to think about it is that you're the CEO, the id and the superego are employees, and the ego is an employee, but the ego is like your personal assistant, or your personal deputy. And so if the awareness is asleep, so the boss is never there, never present, never does anything, then the other employees can bully, trick, etc. the deputy, and there's nothing that a deputy can really do about it. But if the boss is there, then the boss gives an order, the order's got to be followed. And so the more conscious and more present you are in the boardroom of your own mind and soul, then the more that you can actually program this. And that awareness awareness cannot be overpowered by the id. And as long as it's paying attention, it cannot be tricked by the superego, right? And so by eventually cutting off these attempts at overpowering and trickery, you can eventually bring all of these impulses into harmony so that they act when they need to act in a way that makes sense. And then you can really understand, when all that chaos settles down, you can really understand who you are and what your values are and what matters to you and what fulfills you. And that's ultimately what you need to do to get clear on a career that's really going to inspire you.
Before you go, I've got a free gift for you. So if you found this video valuable, if it helped you see the world in a new way, and you're interested in building a career that's going to bring you both personal fulfillment and financial prosperity, then I've got a free presentation for you to help you do just that. So if you go to the link below, it's www.oculusinstitute.com/workshop. That's www.oculusinstitute.com/workshop. Then it'll take you to a registration for a free presentation. It's about 50 minutes long, that's 50, and it's gonna give you the step-by-step process to building your dream career. See you there.